Liane, thanks for coming in today to share with us a little bit about your work and advice to potential students coming here and the community in large. I think a good place to start might be to tell us a little bit about your journey that led you to working on arts education. You're our expert at UCI on thinking about integrating arts into education. How did you end up there?
Well, I started my career in Germany as an English teacher, and I found that the arts were extremely helpful in getting across meaning of cultural memes and uh, idiosyncrasies across cultures. So I started visiting the Waldorf schools and the international schools around Frankfurt, and I was impressed, and ever since I've been really intrigued.
And you have a book coming out, I know, this
Mm-hmm.
summer on some of the work you did down in San Diego. Could
Mm-hmm.
you tell us a little bit about that work?
Yes, it was. It started during the time of No Child Left Behind, and San Diego is a high-performing urban district, but it really had a chasm between the performance of the northern and coastal communities and the neighborhoods that were in the southeast. And so I was brought in to use arts integration. We used actually drama games to help K2 English learners learn English faster.
So, in this work in San Diego, what exactly happened in the classrooms that you were studying and working to introduce?
Um, we actually delivered the professional development in each student's or each teacher's classroom. So they actually had a teaching artist come in weekly, and the teaching artist would co-teach with the classroom teacher. So the children knew the teacher, they felt confident, they felt relaxed, and they played drama games. We mostly took fairy tales, like, say, Three Billy Goats Gruff, and each week the children would enact that. They'd start it the day that the teaching artist was there, and then the teacher would practice it for maybe a half an hour a day. And the children became very relaxed with it, and it mimics how children learn their native language at home. For example, um, when a child is first learning to speak, they listen very carefully to the speech behaviors of their siblings and their parents, and then they reproduce that. Well, we produced something very similar in these little scenarios where they're acting out a story. And the children who were confident in English would kind of take the lead, but the others would listen carefully and join in. And over a year, it really had an impact on their English language skills.
So, do you believe that arts in particular is a mechanism to reach across cultures and break down some of these language barriers that are existent everywhere in the world, but in Southern California in particular?
Um, yes, because if you just have them repeat by rote or learn certain phrases, it doesn't become something that they naturally produce themselves. And so the classroom drama, and actually this has been shown in many cultures and is well researched. The classroom drama does this with young children. They are actually listening and responding naturally. And in that format, they really absorb not only the meaning of the words, but the cultural ideas.
And I know much has been written about uh, um, these fairy tales and the kind
Mm-hmm.
of the Jungian
Yeah.
elements of them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that why, in particular, you were drawn to using these classic fairy tales in the setting?
Definitely. I mean, I was very familiar with Jung's work. I have to admit, though, it was also that they didn't cost anything. There's no copyright. And so, and the fact that young children love stories about animals that they can relate to. They feel relaxed, you know, they've got their stuffed animals at home and things. So it's a combination of all three.
Right. Easy for all people to connect to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's very, very interesting. I know some of the work you did down in San Diego also had a science literacy angle to it or dimension to it.
That was grades 3 to 5, and once again, that reflected the needs of the district. They had very high-performing schools in science, upper elementary science, but the English learners were having trouble because of the complexity of the language of science and the vocabulary. So we took that on, and in this case, it wasn't fairy tales. We were actually having them act out. For example, we would take masking tape and do the outline of a human body on the gym floor, and would have the heart and, you know, the lungs and things, and then they would actually pretend they were blood corpuscles, picking up oxygen in the lungs, taking it through the body. They'd be very energetic as they started, and then they get more and more tired as they came back to the heart and back to the lungs, and then they'd perk up again. And it's a simple thing, but for a third, fourth, or fifth grader, it's memorable. And so they got that message, and we did it with the digestive system. We did it with astronomy.
I remember there was that exercise you did with the position of the Earth and the sun and day and night. Can you share that one with us?
Yes, they'd start just looking at a construction paper sun in the front of the room and would tell them it's noon. And then they would just do we'd have some slow classical music, and then they'd rotate so that halfway around their back would be to the sun, and would stop and would explain it's now midnight. And then they'd start rotating again toward noon and would ask them not to move their head, but when could you see the sun out of the corner of your eye? And that's dawn. And they'd start to get the idea that if I were the whole Earth and I could start to see the sun on that place on Earth, yes, this is the rotation of the sun and it's the relationship to the time of day. And they loved to do it, which was also helpful.
So the actual physical movement of the students, do you believe that helps with this kind of cognitive retention of information?
Mm-hmm. The multisensory aspect of the arts. And for elementary children, it's also the concreteness of it. They're still concrete learners. And so it helps them memory.
I know also some of the work you've been doing also has been in partnership with some of the local charter schools. And one of our PhD students, as you know, has just launched this new charter school on using the Waldorf method and focused on arts integration. Can you tell me a little bit about the possibilities you've seen in some of the charter schools to realize some of these ambitions around the arts?
Well, the thing about charters is that children vary tremendously, just according to their life experiences and things like that. The public schools are really focused on what helps the mass of children, what kind of curriculum, what subjects, what do you integrate, what do you teach at a certain level. But there's lots of kids that aren't nourished by the things that are in the public school curriculum because they have different interests or they're learning at a certain rate. And the charter schools help with that.
So it's the standardization in some of the public schools that kind of gets in the way of individualizing instruction.
I think the charters draw families that have a child, one or more children, who aren't thriving in a public school simply because there's something different about their interests, their talents, and so charters provide that alternative.
I remember one thing you've mentioned to me is that your deeply held belief that kids will turn out well with a little support and sympathy.
Mm-hmm.
And can you say a little bit about more about that and how settings, whether they're charter or non-charter, then with arts integration can provide that sort of nourishment for your youth?
Um, well, to use the Waldorf schools as an example, they keep children with the same teacher from grade 1 to grade 8. Their belief is that it's the personal relationship between the teacher and the students that really supports students' learning, and that it takes more than 1 year for a teacher to really understand a student. So the idea is that if the teacher-student relationship is strong and you have a strong teacher, they will be able to understand the students' needs and individualize the curriculum in a unique way.
Thank you. So, as you know, at UCI, we've just received these two major art collections around California art, and are now in the planning stage of launching a museum on campus around California arts. Can you speak a little bit about how that might be a resource for the campus as a whole, the community, for the School of Education in particular?
Well, the one that I'm familiar with of the two is the Irvine Museum, which focuses on California Impressionism. And we used to, before we switched the Arts and Human Development class to a hybrid, where the students only have 80 minutes in the class, we used to go every term to the Irvine Museum, and it was one of their favorite things. In fact, we used to take a field trip to Crystal Cove State Park, and they would actually see many of the places that the paintings had been done, and they would also work on arts and science integration, and then they'd go to the museum and they'd see the paintings, and it was just a really neat opportunity.
So bringing it closer here to campus.
Then we can walk. Now we can go again.
And you know, as a faculty member here at UCI, we have a role in to help provide advice, guidance to the community as a whole. What might you tell them about the importance of arts education in the lives of their children or children in the community?
Technology has become such a big factor in education. One of the things parents don't always think about is that part of children being effective adults is the ability to be a self-starter and to think through things on your own. When they spend a lot of time on Facebook and other social media, they spend a lot of time watching TV and playing video games, those are all very generic. And there's a certain passivity that is related to simply being a recipient of something. You can learn a lot that way, but there's no way to respond and to interact in an individual way with these technological phenomena. And I think that what the arts...
With some of them anyway, right?
Some
of them
of
are
them.
built in more like
There are
these
some.
Minecraft interactions and
There
so
are.
on.
Yes, that's true.
But in general, much of it is just the streaming, the videos and so on, which is completely passive.
And children can actually become kind of somnambulant in the classroom. they're listening, but they're not listening with total engagement. And so you find that they don't remember a lot of the curriculum. Teachers will say, but I told them we had a lesson on it or one or more lessons, but then at the end of the year, it's almost like it's evaporated. And so the arts are one way. For example, in science, drawing used to be a very important part of medical school because doctors would learn how to draw something so that they could remember it, so that they could recognize it another time.
And the actual technique probably is not all that different than surgery. Or
Yes, exactly. And so there was an individualization of an image. You had a connection to it. And if you just see an image on a screen and you don't really connect with it, I mean, you understand the connection between the image and what you're learning, but it isn't personalized, it's often not remembered. Although I have to agree with you, photography can be a great learning technique if they are the photographers. Because the students will give a lot of thought to the scene and they'll take multiple pictures of it. And that will stay with them.
It seems like connections and relationships are kind of at the center of a lot of your thinking about education, the relationship of the student to the teacher, the student and the subject.
And part of it is that up until the age of 11 or 12, they're not abstract thinkers. So the action of having done something, worked on a project, drawn a picture, is what they remember. That's what they represent in their memory, and that's when they recall what they recall. The other part is that emotion is very powerful with young kids. And so relationships are very powerful. And what they do in a group where they feel part of the group and they're feeling connected and comfortable stays with them. On the other hand, when they're nervous and self-conscious, that actually is almost a barrier between the individual and what the teacher is trying to teach them.
Well, Liane, thanks for coming in and sharing the power of the arts in education with us today.